Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned from my weekly reading report. Yes, my weekly reading report, that fantastic program where I talk about all the stuff that I read during the previous week. And last week was insane. It was insanely busy. So I've been behind on everything, and I didn't read as much as I would have liked to because just there was all this real life stuff. A lot of real life stuff, Roger. He knows I'm not a big fan of that. But yeah, there was that to deal with. But I did read some stuff. So let's talk about the stuff that I read. I'll break out my list for the 500 book challenge, the challenge where I have to read 500 books that I own before I will buy any new ones. But actually, before I get to this, I should say an official goodbye to June on the Range 2025. I was hoping to get to one more Western last week. I was planning on that. It just didn't work out because I just ran out of June, you know. But I did have a great time with June on the Range again this year. I think I read 5 books for June on the Range, which is about average for me for June on the Range. It was a lot of fun. All the books that I read were pretty good to great. So yeah, it was successful. I had a lot of wonderful co-hosts this year for June on the Range, and a lot of them read a lot more than I did for June on the Range because I just don't read that quickly. And I had a bunch of other stuff to read. So, you know, they put up a lot of really awesome videos. And it's really nice that something I created kind of on a whim has, you know, become kind of a thing on BookTube. I mean, there are booktubers doing June on the Range who have no idea who I am. So that's kind of cool in its own way. But now, June on the Range is no more. It's galloped off into the sunset. And now, it is Rocket Summer. Rocket Summer, Roger. A month devoted to reading vintage and classic science fiction. Classic science fiction. And week 1 for classic science fiction is devoted to science fiction up through the 1930s. So that's going to be fun. Also this month, Private Eye July, so I've got some detective stuff to read this month. So there's a lot on my plate for July, but hopefully it won't be as insanely busy as last month was. We will see. But what did I read last week anyway? Okay. I only finished a couple of books. Book 1 was number 263, which is not a book you might expect to see me talking about on this dumb channel, and that's this one. This is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, a book I've been avoiding for decades because of my own pride and prejudice, my prejudice against romantic fiction. But I was dared to read this book, and so, of course, I had to read it. And I'm glad I did, because it is, surprise, surprise, a really good book. This is excellent, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I was a little worried in the beginning of this book because it has kind of a slow start. At least it seemed to me to be kind of a slow start. It kind of felt like, in the very beginning of this book, like being at this dinner party with people you don't like, and it just goes on and on forever. It seemed like that's the direction this was taking, but no, it actually became very interesting. And it was funny, and it was clever. The main character, Elizabeth Bennet, is awesome. And of course, the character who is hovering around the background of this book all the way through, much like Dracula in Dracula, was Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy is not a vampire, which is unfortunate because the book would have been even better if he was, but he wasn't. He was just he's a rich guy with a heart of gold, so you know it's kind of a fantasy in its own way, this book. But Mr. Darcy is the very interesting character who is in love with Elizabeth Bennet. And in the beginning of the book, he just seems like a total ass. and frankly seems like that for a long time. But it turns out, no, he's a good guy, Mr. Darcy. And the slow buildup actually works in this book's favor, though. You know, this book was written when there were not quite so many distractions as there are now. So it wasn't unusual for a piece of literature at this time to take its time in setting up characters. And because of how well this was done, you know, there are certain scenes that are very, very effective. Like the first time Mr. Darcy proposes marriage to Elizabeth. That was a very effective scene. And even more so, the letter that he gives her right afterwards. These are effective because of just how the story was told up to this point, and the building of the characters, and the mystery surrounding Mr. Darcy, and Elizabeth Bennet's own pride and prejudices. It was interesting. It was a good book. The only book from Jane Austen that I've read, and it's probably her best book, right? Because I can't imagine that the other books were as good as this, because this one was really, really good. But maybe next July I will dust off another Jane Austen book. I have them all, of course. Most of them look kind of like this one, but I have them all. Actually, I think I have an omnibus volume from Penguin of all of Jane Austen's major novels. So I might find that. But yeah, I will come back to Jane Austen probably next July. You know, if we're still around next July, we will dust off more Jane Austen, because this was actually quite good. I was pretty impressed by it, and I'm glad I read it. So there you go. That was book number 263. But for book 264, I got something quite different, which would be Conan of the Barbarian. Conan the Barbarian. The Age Unconquered. Conan the Barbarian, The Age Unconquered. This is from the new line of Titan Comics. This is the third volume of these trade paperbacks, which collects issues 9 through 12. And so this was the culmination of the first year of the new Conan series. It's mostly awesome. I thought this book was mostly really, really good. There was just one thing, though. Well, there were a couple things that were like a little, but there was one thing that it was ridiculous. There's one really, really ridiculous thing, and it almost derails the whole book, in my opinion, because it comes towards the end. I'll get to it. Anyway, this book is written by Jim Zub. The art is by Roberto de la Torre, which is fantastic. We get a wonderful map of the Thurian age, the pre-cataclysmic age, because Conan is magically transported to King Kull's world. Yes, we get a team up of King Kull and Conan the Barbarian in this. You would never know from the frankly dull cover. I mentioned last week about the dull cover on the Conan graphic novels, the dull covers. And I get that there's a reason for that. But I don't understand why you wouldn't have King Kull and Conan on the cover of this, because they're together in the story, and that's kind of a major thing. Instead, we just get another shot of Conan wandering through the forest. I admit, I don't understand that. This could be the cover of any Conan story, and I will stop complaining. I'll stop complaining about the covers, I swear. Anyway, Conan arrives in King Kull's world, and he had, in the previous issue, before he was magically transported to Kull's world, he stabbed himself, but he was magically healed when he was transported. And so he immediately runs into Brule the Spear Slayer, and he knows Brule the Spear Slayer from a vision that he had had. And so after some shenanigans involving strangling this poor lion, they travel together to Valusia. And here is a nice double-page spread that is absolutely breathtakingly awesome of Valusia when Conan first sees King Kull's city. Just magnificent stuff. So the artwork in this, superb. De La Torre did the first 4 issues of this series, and he came back for these issues, and yeah, these are just as good. And surprisingly, Conan runs into Yag Kosha, who we remember from Robert E. Howard's Tower of the Elephant. Now, this is one of the things that are a little because Yag Kosha recognizes Conan, because apparently Yag Kosha can see the future, and he knows what's going to happen in the future. But if that's true, there's something that happens to Yag Kosha in the future that's really, really bad. And you think that he would try to avoid that if he knew what was coming in the future. And he clearly does from his interactions with Conan in this comic book. So that's one thing that I was like, what? I mean, if what happened to him should not have happened. It almost could not have happened if he knew it was going to happen. It's that kind of thing. But I'm letting it go because Yag Kosha apparently moves in mysterious ways. And he's drawn quite wonderfully here. And I was happy to see the character, so that's okay. Then they run into King Kull. There we are, in case you didn't know who he was. This is King Kull. And unfortunately, King Kull has been driven insane by the evil Thulsa Doom. And the reason he's driven insane is so him and Conan can get into a fight. Because much in the tradition of the old Marvel comics, when 2 major characters get together, they have to fight. Even if there's no reason for them to fight, they have to fight. And so they get into a fight. And I have to say, it's a pretty awesome fight. Now, my own opinion is, if Conan was fighting Kull, Conan would win. This is my guess. King Kull could lose control when he's fighting. He would go berserk, And this works for most people that you fight against, I guess, back in the olden days, but not Conan. Conan's always in control. Conan, I think Conan would take out King Kull in the end. But as things go, King Kull is knocked unconscious by Brule the Spear Slayer. And Brule, in knocking him unconscious, literally knocks sense into Kull, so that when he wakes up in the next issue, he will be back to himself, which is good, because immediately after this, Brule the Spear Slayer and Conan are thrown into a dungeon. But then King Kull wakes up, goes and releases Conan and Brule the Spear Slayer. Now, Conan has nothing else to do, since he's stuck in the pre-cataclysmic age magically, than go with Brule and King Kull to Atlantis, where the dark magic which has affected Kull is located. So they're going to go to Atlantis. So that's awesome. So they go on the ship. They go to Atlantis. They're attacked by kind of zombie pirates, and so there's that going on. There's a ton of grisly bloodshed in this. And in the third part is when the ridiculous thing happens that I'm going to have to mention. But there's so much awesomeness in this. The fights in this are great. But a ridiculous thing happens. And so spoiler alert if you didn't want to know. So King Kull finds an Atlantean sword, which looks a lot like the sword from the Conan the Barbarian movie. It's immediately taken from him magically because Thulsa Doom himself rises from the background and then stabs Kull right, stabs him right through his body so that the blade projects from his body, and it's just grisly. Now, when I saw this is in part 3. So this is the cliffhanger here. Kull has been killed. This is clearly a fatal injury. And I thought at the end of this, Thulsa Doom is here finally. We knew he was coming, and here he is, and he does not disappoint. He's beautifully drawn and just as evil as you would expect. Now, at this point, though, I thought this is kind of a brave thing for Jim Zub to do, stabbing King Kull in this way, because this clearly would kill him. And so I thought killing King Kull is that's a bold move. Now, we don't know from Robert E. Howard's work how King Kull dies. We never get to that point. We never get to the death of Kull. When the Kull stories end, Kull is still a king, just like he was when the Kull series started. The Kull series is not that long compared to the Conan series. And by the end of the series, Kull is still on the throne. Brule the Spear Slayer is his right-hand man. And things in the kingdom are basically the same as when he started. He got rid of the serpent people, he's been doing his job. But we never see his end. We don't know when King Kull dies. And so this very well could have been his death. He could have been killed by his arch enemy, Thulsa Doom. And so I thought that's a bold move. But of course I thought, well, it's unlikely that they'll actually kill Kull. What probably will happen is that he will be magically healed. Somehow, much like Conan in the beginning of this book, who also suffered a fatal injury, he will be magically healed. That's what I thought was going to happen. But neither one of those things happened. So, in the beginning, we have Thulsa Doom, who gives... Well, first of all, he's drawn... He just looks great. Let's just say he's just beautiful in this comic. He looks just like he should. And he gives this long origin story, which is actually pretty awesome. And we find out that he is indeed Cthulhu's from Atlantis. So it turns out that is who he is. And illustrated beautifully. And it turns out, and then we have his background with King Kull. And Kull is down on the ground dying, and he kicks him, and he's just being a real dick. And so while Kull is bleeding to death, Conan fights Thulsa Doom. So finally we get the fight between Conan and Thulsa Doom, which is awesome. That's exactly what we wanted. And it's finally happening in the comic book. So it's great. And I mean, look at that. His sword breaks. He stabs it in Thulsa Doom's eye. Doesn't matter. Doesn't make any difference because he's dead. It's just great. It's a great fight. And it goes on for a little bit. But then a weird thing happens. Kull is not dead. This whole fight is going on, and Kull is just kind of like, ugh, that hurts. And Brule is saying to Kull, bring forth your tiger strength, and let us banish this bastard once and for all. And he says, indeed. His tiger strength? Okay, so Kull is still bleeding to death because he's not doing anything to prevent that. Okay, he's still bleeding out. Conan continues to fight Thulsa Doom. There's a big cataclysm. Place floods with water. And then at the end here, Kull and Brule crawl out of this pit. Right? And Brule is saying, Kull is saying, Brule, my wounds, as he would say. And Brule says, deep as they are, my friend, I know you will survive thanks to your tiger strength. Both of us have bled more in past battles and lived to tell the tale. No, you haven't. You have not bled this much. So let's go back, because this is the ridiculous thing, right? This is the wound Kull gets. Look at the sword and where it's coming out from his body. So let's just pretend that somehow this sword missed the spine. It missed his spine. Okay, let's say it does. Still, if you see where this sword went through his body, probably it's low enough that it missed the liver, but it looks like it could have punctured the stomach and sliced into the stomach. But even if it was low enough to miss the stomach, it almost certainly sliced into and probably sliced through his colon. So, I mean, that part of the colon that is right under the stomach, it probably sliced right through there, which is a terrible injury to have. And so we have an entrance wound, we've got an exit wound, we've got all of that damage that the sword made going through the body, a colon that's sliced in half almost certainly, internal bleeding. The object that caused this wound has been removed, so the blood is flowing freely onto the floor. To survive this wound, you would need to be transferred to an ER immediately. But there's no ER here. They're in the pre-cataclysmic age. And surgery is literally the only thing that could save Kull. He should be dead. He should have not survived the battle that Conan had with Thulsa Doom. He should have bled out, because he's bleeding all of that time. Like I said, he's not doing anything to prevent nobody's doing anything to prevent the bleeding. And so he would almost certainly be in shock and losing blood pressure. He should have died. Let's just say, and the only thing that could have saved him, because we are in a sword and sorcery story, is if there were a wizard or some kind of magical mumbo jumbo that would heal his body. That is what I expected, because it's literally the only thing that could save Kull's life in this situation. And the fact that he just got up and he's like, oh, wow, that hurt. That's insane. That's crazy. It's the one thing in this book that I was like, because it's asking, I think that asks too much of the reader. You know, so much of this book worked really, really well. Like I said, the artwork was great. The story itself was pretty epic. It was great fun the whole way through. But if you're going to give a character what is clearly a fatal wound, I don't care how much tiger strength you have. Okay, you're not going to survive that. Tiger strength is not going to heal your colon or a punctured stomach. And it's not going to help you with internal bleeding. And it's not going to... You get where I'm coming from. So that really, really bothered me. Hopefully, when Kull appears again in the comics, he will immediately be transferred to a wizard who saves his life or something, because, well, you get what I'm saying. That bothered me. So that's why I complained about it for 10 minutes. Okay, I did read some other stuff. Of course, I've been reading Fantastic Four. I didn't read as much of the Fantastic Four as I wanted to, because I am, of course, reading every issue of the Fantastic Four from the first run of the Fantastic Four. And I'm almost towards the end of this mini-series that came out back in 1987, I think it was. Fantastic Four versus the X-Men. So I'm on the final part of that. I haven't quite finished it yet. I was just reading it actually before I made this video. And it's good. I remember it being really good. And it still holds up as a pretty good story. It's written by Chris Claremont. And so surprisingly, it's actually much more of a Fantastic Four story than it is an X-Men story. The X-Men are in it, but they don't really do much. And a lot of the drama, I mean, Kitty Pryde is dying. And that's where their troubles stem from. Reed Richards was unable or unwilling, actually, to help her because he was afraid he would cause like a cataclysmic disaster of some kind if he did, using the technology that he had available that could have saved her. And so that causes a conflict between the X-Men and the Fantastic Four. And so the X-Men go to Doctor Doom, great idea, to try to save Kitty Pryde. But really, most of the story and the story's drama centers on the Fantastic Four. And so it's pretty good. It's not as good as I remember it being, but it's pretty good. It's very, very... Chris Claremont is very heavily into the soap opera melodrama, so you get a lot of that. But good. And the issues at this time in 1986 and 1987, the issues that came after John Byrne left the book, are pretty good. So it continues to be excellent, Fantastic Four. I am doing something that I did a couple years ago on this channel. Is I am doing a thing where I am reading Superman every day. So it's a challenge that I'm giving myself once again, to read a Superman story or read something Superman every day. And the challenge comes in, when you have to work those 12-hour days or whatever, or are on vacation or have guests or whatever. Times such as those make, getting to a Superman story difficult on occasion. But I'm going to see if I can do it for a whole year. It is the summer of Superman because of that movie, which looks like it's going to be pretty good. I could be wrong. I mean, I have little faith in comic book movies in general nowadays. But the Superman movie looks like it might be good. We'll see. That Fantastic Four movie looks like it's going to be crap. But the Superman movie looks like it's going to be pretty good. And so I picked up this book. This is the 85th anniversary collection, which I got a couple years ago. And finally am getting around to reading. And it's split up into different ages. We've got the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Dark Age. Apparently the 1980s and into the 90s was the Dark Age. And that is followed by the Modern Age, which is the 21st century. And I read all of the stories already from the Golden Age, and they were awesome. The high point for me was Superwoman, when Lois Lane becomes Superwoman. That was just a great story. Just great. So, yeah. I'm reading this so that it will help me read Superman every day. And next I have a bunch of Silver Age stories to get to, and that's going to be great. Superman returns to Krypton. So yeah, Superman every day. How long can I manage it? I'm going to try to go a year. Unfortunately, that meant I didn't read any Tomb of Dracula this week. I intended to do that today, but I just haven't gotten to it, probably because I've been reading the Fantastic Four. But I did get to Tower of Shadows. This is for another comic book challenge that I'm doing involving the Marvel horror comics of the 1970s, my Marvel Monster Plan. And one of the comics that I'm reading is Tower of Shadows. So every week I'm going to be reading a Tower of Shadows, which became Creatures on the Loose, which was my favorite monster anthology series from the 70s. But I read the third issue of Tower of Shadows, which was a lot better, actually, than the second issue. It was pretty good. We've got a really cool cover involving this poor fella who's being attacked by creatures in the wax museum. There is a wax museum in this book, but this doesn't happen, really, in that story. That story involves aliens. The first story is by Len Wein and Gene Colan, which is pretty good. It's a pretty good story. And Gene Colan, of course, great artist. And so his stories are moody enough that they're excellent for this kind of supernatural horror story. It's not the greatest story in the world, but it's not bad. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good story. And then we get to this story by Gary Friedrich and George Tuska, Midnight in the Wax Museum. And there's Friedrich himself is telling the story in his 1970s hippie gear about basically a haunted house which just appears out of nowhere. And you would think it would be inhabited by ghosts, and it seems to be, but it isn't. It's aliens. You know, if you need an antagonist and you can't think of somebody good in these old Marvel comics, it was almost always aliens. Aliens were showing up in Marvel comics all the time. And in this case, it was aliens. So not the greatest story in the world, but not bad. It was not bad. But the best part, aside from these really awesome advertisements, the best part was the third story, because that was an adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft story, The Terrible Old Man. And this was adapted by Roy Thomas, and the artwork is by Barry Smith. So we got the team from the original Conan the Barbarian comic book doing this H.P. Lovecraft story. And it was just awesome. So this is fantastic. This is the high point of the series so far. Suitably creepy and very well adapted. This is a very short story. So it's an easy story to adapt into comic books. Roy Thomas didn't really change anything. He just basically told the story the way H.P. Lovecraft did. And it's excellent. It's excellent. So that was the best thing in Tower of Shadows so far, probably. That was excellent. So Tower of Shadows, issue number 3, that was really good. But I also felt like I had to read something for Book Trek. Book Trek, another great reading event that's going on all summer where we read Star Trek fiction. So I read the first 2 issues of Star Trek The Next Generation. So before this, there was a mini-series that DC did. They did the mini-series because they didn't want to do a whole series because they didn't know if the show was going to tank or not. But it turned out it was very successful right from the start. And so towards the middle or the end of the second season is when they started doing the regular series. And the artwork is actually pretty good. It's by Pablo Marcos, and Michael Jan Friedman is writing the comic book. And Michael Jan Friedman did some novels, some Star Trek novels that were pretty good, as far as I understand. I only read one of them, and it was pretty good. Look at Buffed Worf there. This, I guess, he's apparently on the holodeck fighting this creature. So the artwork, like I said, it's pretty good. The story itself is kind of like one of those sort of forgettable stories from Star Trek The Next Generation, very second season, where the episodes aren't bad, but they're not great. They're just okay. An interesting thing is that when when Pablo Marcos is drawing this book, you don't get a lot of other characters on the Enterprise. So where's the crew? I mean, we have our main characters, but look at the bridge. Riker and Picard are down on the planet, and so there's nobody taking over Data's spot. There's nobody else on the bridge other than Worf, Data, and Counselor Troy. And the same earlier in 10 Forward, you only have our characters that are taking part in the scene. There's nobody else. So kind of an empty Enterprise. But the story itself was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. It takes 2 issues to tell the story. This is an excellent cover, by the way. The artwork was pretty good in this series. So it's an okay story. Nothing to write home about, but not bad either. And here's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which, you know, you got to run right out and see this movie when it comes out. Bill and Ted. Oh, those were the days. And I think that's everything I read. Right now, I'm reading something, though, for Rocket Summer, and that is this. I'm about 100 pages into the Moon Pool, so I will talk more about this next week. The Moon Pool, written by A. Merritt, is also the selection for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club for July. You can get this book on Project Gutenberg. All of Roger's picks for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club are available on Project Gutenberg. 100 pages in, and this is pretty good. It's fun. I read this once years ago when I was a teenager, but I don't really remember much about it. But so far, like I said, about a third of the way through, maybe a little bit more. And it's awful good so far. So my first selection for Rocket Summer is going really well. And that is going to be followed by this book, The Best of John W. Campbell. Most of the stories in this book are from the 1930s, so perfect for the first week of Rocket Summer. I don't think I will have a chance to get to anything for the other reading event that's going on, which is Private Eye July. I don't think I'll be able to get into anything for that this week, but probably the following week I will get to something for that. I have a couple books lined up. And that's all I have to say for this week. This has gone on long enough. I will catch you next time.